Therefore, you must be ready. Therefore, you must be ready. What? What are we supposed to be ready for? That will come later. We begin today the Gospel of Matthew, and welcome to all of you that we haven't seen before. It's so good to have you with us this morning. We are here to begin the church year. We are here for Advent 1. We begin that time of walking towards wondering what would it be like to have that light born again in us. But let me not get ahead of myself. Because sometimes it's hard, right, to think, well, let's see, what's the good Christian evangelical message? That this is all about darkness. Kevin texted me yesterday and said, have you got a good message for the sign out front? I said, hope, that's a good one. I said, maybe not welcome to the dark side. Maybe that wouldn't be a good idea. I thought it was funny, but anyway. So we have this beginning of the year with Matthew. And Matthew is very intentional about teaching us about what our actions are supposed to be, how it is we're supposed to live with God and in community. Right? How it is. And in this gospel this morning, Jesus is preparing his followers for what it will be like to live a life without him in physical form. We as resurrection people believe that we still have Jesus with us, but at this time of this writing in this gospel, he's saying, I'm not going to be here that much longer. And so this is how you're called to be in the world when I'm not here, because you never know when I might show up. So they're saying, just like any good student would say, well, when, like, if you could tell us when you're going to be here, you know, if you could just text me and let me know, then I'll be ready. Which door do you want to come in? I'll make sure I've got it open. And Jesus is saying it doesn't work like that. I don't even know when it's going to happen. But what I know right now is I know what to teach you. I know how to tell you how to live. And so Matthew's the gospel where we have the Sermon on the Mount. You may or may not know that you do know much more about the Sermon on the Mount than you may even think you do. Matthew has over 20 parables, stories where we're learned to teach. I read something this week that said there may be 30 parables in the Gospels. And this person thought that 20 of them were in Matthew. So Matthew is really trying to give us some information about how we're supposed to be and what that wakefulness means. We hear in Isaiah, let us walk in the light. Let us walk in the light of the Lord. So if we were to imagine that that is a place for us to land, what would it mean? Matthew gives us in parables over and over again stories about where people's hearts or minds, places where people feel like their hearts are broken open and yet God finds God's way in. Grace in the midst of darkness. How is it that we might see it in our own world? I was thinking this week that in our city here in Dover, there's this wonderful ministry, they don't call it that, but it's called Red's Good Vibes. And it's a food truck, because food trucks are cool, right? So it's a food truck. But what's a little different about this food truck is that it was started by 3 siblings. They lost their brother a couple of years ago. I forget exactly how many, but they lost their brother. And one of their brother's dreams was that he'd be able to have a food truck because he thought they were really cool, and that he'd feed freely, that he'd give food freely to those in his community, but particularly those that had food insecurity, veterans, people that were having a hard day. And so after they lost their brother, they were like, what do we do with ourselves? Because darkness, hope, that's what we Think about this week. What is it like if we don't have Jesus with us? If we don't have their brother, whose nickname was Red, with them? What do we do with that? What does God lead us to do? And I'm always amazed because, we never know what we'll do in our own circumstance, but I can't imagine that I would be this creative if, God forbid, this particular thing happened to me. They were awake. They were wondering. I don't know if they're people of faith, but they're certainly people of hope. They're certainly people of hope. And so how is it that they could live forward, move forward? Hope in light of despair. So they've got this food truck. And you see them there at the train station here in Dover a lot. They're also in Portsmouth and Somersworth. Two sisters and a brother. The brother does all the business end of it, and the two sisters do the hard work of shopping and cooking and preparing the meals. And the guests get to pick off a menu because they say, you know what, this is all about good vibes. There is no judgment here. They play his favorite playlist. They wear tie-dye shirts because he loved them. That's Advent. How is it that in the midst of darkness, Jesus says, what will you do? How will you live when it feels like your darkest hour? How will you live when you don't know how you're going to move on? How will you live when I'm not here the way you're used to me being here? Let us walk in the light of the Lord. But that takes practice. If you're sitting here going, that's a great story, but that's a lot easier said than done. You are right. You are so right. Because there are times when I bet each one of us, some of us that may have been visiting these pews or other pews for a very long time, still have those moments where it's like, you know what, God, I'm done. I don't see light right now. And that's okay, because there will be people in your path and God will be there for you even when you don't know it. And sometimes, for me, I believe that it takes practice. It takes just showing up. Sometimes, in 12-step programs, we talk about faking it till you make it. Sometimes it's showing up and just acting like we think God might want us to. Maybe that's just getting out of bed and having a meal and getting some sleep. Maybe talking to a healthy friend when we're in those dark places. It can turn us around. Let us walk. How is it we hear from Isaiah? Let us walk in the light of the Lord. Jesus kept showing up in those vulnerable places. The hemorrhaging woman, the blind man. All those places where people wouldn't talk to them. All those places where they felt outside and alone and broken. That's where Jesus wanted to say, so what's your story? That's where Jesus said, so, what's up? Are you hungry? It wasn't like us and kind of was like, oh, well, there's a crowd over here, so I can safely, without judgment, go talk to that crowd, because I know them. We've all done it. It's okay. So when we think about these shadows, when we think about Advent, let us think some about how, if we've got that despair, hope, how would that come with God? Conflict, God could bring peace. You know anything about conflict, do you? It's fascinating, right? I said in lectionary study this week, we were talking, if there was ever a time, and I obviously believe this, but like anybody else, I wonder some days, if I ever thought that Scripture was still applicable, that it was written all these years ago. Isn't it hard to believe that they're still talking about being drunk, sleeping around, doing gluttony, all this stuff that people have done, and politics and stuff, all this stuff, don't let that divide you, we hear this morning. Well, that's fixed, right? Because this was written a long time ago. That stuff's not getting in our way anymore. So this morning we hear conflict. God could bring peace, sorrow, joy, hate, love. If we think about those people that did that truck, out of their deepest despair, they find hope. We hear this morning to be watchful, to wait. The disciples say, well, when are you going to come? That way I know I'll be ready. And Jesus says, God didn't even tell me. Because it will come in the most unexpected times, in the most unexpected places. Have you ever had a conversation and you were having a crummy day and you went about your day? Maybe you were, if this is particularly ironic, if you were having a day when you were absolutely full of self-justification and you knew you were right about everything. And then you have this conversation with somebody and God just shows up and it's just this interesting leveling agent of, oh, all of a sudden you don't feel righteous or angry. Maybe that vulnerable place in that hard conversation, you got to feel grace. As we enter into Advent on this particular day, if you've been here for a long time, if you're new to us or new to the church, however it is, welcome. There's no judgment here. I bet you'll have times of judgment, and we'll have times of judgment. We all have that, because we're human, right? But God is with us on this journey in the midst of finding hope in that dark place. So I ask us each to think about what are the things that get in our way of hearing God's grace. And Matthew, I believe, would ask us individually, what are those things? Am I stuck on something? Am I stuck on something so hard that I can't hear God's will? My will, not yours, be done. That's not a helpful prayer, to be open to where we might want to go. And the other part of the prayer that Matthew calls us to is looking out beyond ourselves. Let us be the light of God. How is it that we might see ways or places in the world? Right here in our community, this little city of Dover really does a wonderful job. There will be people that will tell you the places that they're not doing a good job, because that's what we do. We're human. But this little city tries very hard to help the other. There are all kinds of ways. How is it that we do that? So on this day as we enter, I invite you to a holy Advent. I invite you to a blessed season, maybe not so much of darkness, although if you're there, my prayers are with you and God is also, but more a time of reflection and invitation. How is it that we can live and be with God in our lives? What is God inviting you into on this day? I would hope that it's letting us find ways to walk in the light of God, and that when we are able to do that, and when that happens, and when we're wandering around our week, let us not hear Jesus say, I'm really bummed I missed you today. Let us not wonder, did we miss Jesus this afternoon? Let us wonder about that.